Hello and welcome to Shakespeare the Whole Year, a series of research based, student friendly talks on Shakespeare and his works, hosted by the Shakespeare Society of India East Zone under the aegis of SSI New Delhi. Lecture number 8 will be delivered by Dr. Gargi Tolapatro. The title of the talk is You Have But Slumbered Here, a brief overview of the performance history of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Dr. Gargi Tolapatro is Assistant Professor in the Department of English, the Bhavanipur Education Society College, Kolkata. She is also the chief editor of the Encyclopedia of Indian Literature and a member of the editorial board of Indenture Papers, a journal published by Global Gourmet Institute, Fiji. Dr. Tolapatra received a research associateship from the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, in 2016. A critic, creative writer, and translator, her works have been published in various academic journals and books of repute. Dr. Tolapatro's monograph on subaltern studies, edited by Professor Krishna Sen, was published by Orient Black Swan in June 2024. Some of her recent publications include Writing on Moving Water, Kamala Das's Poetry Through the Lens of Feminisms, 2023, The Tempest, Through the Lens of Natya Shastra, 2019, and William Faulkner, The Sound and the Fury, 2020. Her translations include Clean Jungle Tales, published by the Publications Division, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India, New Delhi, in 2017. Over to Dr. Gargi Tolapatro.
You have but slumbered here. A brief overview of the performance history of A Midsummer Night's Dream. With a dramatic career spanning across the Elizabethan and the Jacobean periods, William Shakespeare remains one of the most important writers of English literature. Well known for his plays as well as his sonnets, Shakespeare's works transcend time and context. Interpreted in various lights across the centuries, his plays have appealed to the audiences across the boundaries of space and time. The play under discussion today is A Midsummer Night's Dream, which was first performed in 1595. Ending with three weddings, it is a supposed fact that this play was written for a noble wedding, and Stanley Wells, who is well known for editing the play for the New Penguin Shakespeare in 1967, notes that, I quote, at least 11 court weddings, ranging in date from 1590 to 1600, have been suggested as the occasion for the play's first performance. Unquote. The Midsummer Night, conventionally 23rd June, would be followed by the Midsummer Day, 24th June. In Shakespearean England, this was one of the oldest and most popular holidays, and the festival had a pagan origin. It was regarded as a time when lunacy was likely and was marked by a feast called Midsummer Ale. Besides fertility and love, the Midsummer Festival was also linked with magic and enchantment. It was considered a time when supernatural forces were at work, and figures like Jack-o'-lantern and Robin Goodfellow were linked to this time through popular beliefs. Robin Goodfellow, particularly, was supposed to be a hairy creature who lived alone, and in the country tradition, he had no connection with Oberon or the other fairies. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare links the Midsummer Festival with May Day, 1st May, which was celebrated as the return of spring and was meant to emphasize the link between nature and human beings. Shakespeare, in this play set in Athens, brings together the fairy world and the mortal world to weave the main plot and subplot. While on the one hand there are Theseus and Hippolyta, the king and queen of the mortal world, along with Hermia, Lysander, Helena, and Demetrius, the two pairs of lovers who represent nobility and are eventually married at the end of the play. On the other hand, there are Oberon and Titania, the king and queen of the fairy world, along with Puck, Oberon's servant and the prime mischief maker, introduced in the play as an extension of Robin Goodfellow, the figure linked with the Midsummer Festival in popular imagination. Since Shakespeare's audience were the people at large, the element of universality is inbuilt in his plays. They are written, as they say, for the layman as well as the scholar. He includes characters from different sections of the society, and in A Midsummer Night's Dream, this effect is achieved by the inclusion of a group of characters collectively referred to as the mechanicals. This group involves the common men of Shakespeare's time and includes a carpenter, a weaver, a bellows mender, a joiner, a tinker, and a tailor. The mechanicals add a different dimension to the play and are pivotal in the progress of the plot and attainment of the comic effect. However, from the theatrical point of view, Nick Bottom, the weaver, is of utmost importance to the comic impact of the play. It is through Puck's mischievous transformation of Bottom into a man with the head of an ass, and Titania's doting over the ass headed Bottom under the influence of the love potion administered by Oberon, that this comedy attains its peak of comic laughter. It is indeed this interaction between individuals across different classes, the royalty of the fairy world and the workmen of the mortal world, that the play has later been interpreted in the light of Bakhtinian carnivalesque. Allardyce Nicole notes that, I quote, the cardinal feature of the romantic comedy is precisely this interweaving of diverse moods and surroundings, where princes meet with clowns and fairies with artisans. Unquote. So, what exactly happens in A Midsummer Night's Dream? The play begins with the marriage preparations of Theseus, the Duke of Athens, and Hippolyta, the Queen of the Amazons. Aegeus, an Athenian nobleman, brings to the court of Theseus his daughter, Hermia, and two young men, Lysander and Demetrius. He asks Theseus to intervene because it is revealed that Hermia and Lysander love each other. However, Aegeus wants Hermia to marry Demetrius. So he asks for the intervention of the Duke, and the latter declares that Hermia must marry the man chosen by her father, failing which she would be sent to a convent or even executed. Hermia and Lysander decide to escape from Athens. And Hermia shares their plan with her childhood friend Helena. Now, Helena is in love with Demetrius and she was also once engaged to him. So, as Lysander and Hermia escape through the woods, Demetrius follows them. And in turn, he is followed by Helena. In the woods, there are two other groups of characters. On the one hand, there are Titania and Oberon. the queen and king of the fairy world, who are engaged in a bitter quarrel over the handing over of a changeling boy whom Oberon wants as his page. On the other hand, there are the mechanicals, who escape into the woods after the day's work to rehearse for their performance at the marriage ceremony of Theseus and Hippolyta. Now, in order to punish Titania for disobeying him, Oberon asks Puck to acquire the love potion from a magical flower, which, when spread over the eyes of a sleeping person, will make them fall in love with the first thing that they see upon waking up. Meanwhile, while the mechanicals are rehearsing their play in the woods, Puck mischievously transforms the head of Bottom into that of an ass. Oberon administers the love potion to Titania's eyes while she is asleep. When she awakens, the first person Titania beholds is the ass headed Bottom, and she falls instantly in love with him. This becomes the prime source of comic laughter in the play. Puck, on the other hand, also applies the love potion to the eyes of Lysander, mistaking him to be Demetrius, and the former, when he wakes up, sees Helena, hence falling in love with her. Through a series of confusions leading to laughter, the conflict is finally resolved. Oberon applies the magic potion to Titania's eyes and Puck to that of Lysander once again. Each one is therefore freed from the effect of the magic potion and the ensuing confusion. The play ends with three weddings: Theseus and Hippolyta, Hermia and Lysander, and Demetrius and Helena. On this occasion, the mechanicals perform, Pyramus and Thisbe at the court. Finally, the fairies emerge to bless the sleeping couples, and only Puck remains on stage, delivering the epilogue and urging the audience to remember the play as though it had been a dream. The influences on A Midsummer Night's Dream were diverse. They included important works such as Ovid's Metamorphoses, Chaucer's Knight's Tale and Merchant's Tale, Reginald Scott's The Discovery of Witchcraft, Apuleius's The Golden Ass, and the New Testament of the Holy Bible. Besides its intelligent characterization, inclusion of magic, and successful generation of comic laughter, another reason that perhaps added to the popularity of the play was the possibility of a speculative political allegory that the contemporary audience could identify, as later suggested by Maurice Hunt. After its first performance in 1595, A Midsummer Night's Dream was performed again in the court in 1604. What remains interesting about this Shakespearean comedy is its performance history ever since. The play never ceased to entertain the audience across all these centuries, and different aspects of the play continued to be explored in the theatrical adaptations thereafter. The earliest known instance of an adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream is said to have been performed in small groups by traveling actors in England across the years of the Puritan interregnum when the theatres were shut down. Around the 1640s, the play was rewritten as a drone, a short farcical piece comprising only the rehearsals by the mechanicals and their performance of Pyramus and Thisbe, and it was called The Merry Conceited Humours of Bottom the Weaver. It was also performed in 1661 after the theatres reopened in the Restoration period. In 1662, the play was performed in its entirety at the King's Theatre, where Samuel Pepys saw it and declared it, and I quote, the most insipid, ridiculous play I ever saw in my life. Unquote. However, the theatrical popularity that the play continued to enjoy through the next few centuries vouched for its ability to transcend its own time and context. It is true that A Midsummer Night's Dream continued to receive critical attention from well known literary figures throughout the following ages. But when it comes to a play, the genre itself necessitates an equal emphasis on tracing the journey of the play across its performance history through different ages. The multiple interpretations and varied receptions impart to the play its distinctiveness. In the epilogue delivered by Puck at the end of A Midsummer Night's Dream, he begins thus, and I quote: "If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here, while these visions did appear." Unquote. Stanley Wells, in his article called A Midsummer Night's Dream Revisited, cites Puck's epilogue and observes that, I quote, "It is only in the theatre that the text achieves realization, and only there that, however imperfectly, the visions of which Robin speaks in his epilogue can appear." Unquote. Since A Midsummer Night's Dream has been staged quite frequently over the intervening centuries, and even adapted for transcultural productions in several languages across the world, it would not be possible to trace a detailed trajectory of all the performances in this lecture. Nonetheless, we will discuss a few significant productions to see how the play metamorphosed in the hands of different directors so as to suit the taste of the particular age in which it was being performed. We begin with the 17th century. In the 17th century, after the reopening of the theatres in the Restoration period, the character of theatre underwent a significant change. Unlike the Shakespearean times, the theatre goers were now more sophisticated and included only the affluent classes. The stage itself was greatly altered as it now moved to the indoor playhouses, included elaborate sceneries, music, and special effects, came to be influenced by the Italian opera, and introduced women on stage to play the female roles. During this time, there are innumerable instances of how Shakespeare's plays were edited and reshaped to suit the changing tastes and social norms. A significant production of A Midsummer Night's Dream was that by Henry Purcell in 1692. He restructured the play into a semi opera called The Fairy Queen, and the emphasis was on visual spectacle. The focus shifted from character, theme, and language to the possibility of visual wonders and inclusion of masks. The woods were highlighted. In order to suit the taste of the contemporary audience, Purcell added to the play music, nymphs, classical gods, swimming swans, elaborate architecture, and numerous songs and dances. The score for the masks was composed by Purcell himself and was lost following his premature death a few years later. It was rediscovered only in the 20th century, and in 2009, The Fairy Queen was performed once again to commemorate the 350th birth anniversary of Henry Purcell. Of the productions in the 18th century, A significant performance was that by David Garrick. It was called The Fairies and staged in 1755. The decade from 1750 to 1760 saw on the English stage a growth of pantomimes, pageants, and operas. Garrick's The Fairies called itself, quote, an English opera taken from Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, unquote. Designed as an opera, the emphasis was on the musical quality of the production, and Garrick is said to have hired two Italian singers for the music and a troupe of well trained boys for the fairy dances. Of the 2,192 lines in the original play, only 600 were retained in this production, and 28 songs were added to it. This production was drawn up from only the first four acts of the play, and it excluded all reference to bottom and the other mechanicals. The Fairies was immensely popular in its own times, and it is said to have brought in £1,520 through 10 performances from February to November 1755. In the Romantic period, yet another important operatic adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream was Frederick Renaud's Dream, staged in 1816. Keeping in mind the interest and taste of the contemporary audience, Renaud's production also stressed on the fantastic aspects of the play. Almost 12 more songs were added, and there was a renewed emphasis on the role of Theseus and his imperial potential, quite in line with the colonial perspective befitting the times, 1816, first half of the 19th century. The play had only three acts and ended with a pageant called The Triumphs of Theseus. In fact, in this production, the handover of the changeling boy becomes almost a gesture of colonial power. It is often conjectured that William Hazlitt, having watched this production, penned his famous review for the Examiner. The fact that A Midsummer Night's Dream as a text appeals to the romantic imagination with its dreamlike quality, which is hampered by its actual physical representation on stage, was highlighted by Hazlitt, who wrote, and I quote, fancy cannot be embodied any more than a simile can be painted. And it is as idle an attempt as it is to personate wall or moonshine. Unquote. However, despite Hazlitt's analysis of the gap between the abstraction and the actual, that representation on stage fails to portray A Midsummer Night's Dream, the play continued to enjoy popularity, and Renaud's own production is said to have gone through no less than 20 performances. Another important production of the play in the 19th century was that by Samuel Phelps, a well known actor manager. With due emphasis on spectacle, Phelps's production brought in a dreamy unity to the play by introducing a visual through line. He aimed at restoring most of Shakespeare's original text while adhering to the conventions of the 19th century staging. For instance, enormous gauze curtains were used during the scenes in the woods, and excellent appliances were designed to produce the effects of moonlight, passing clouds, and descending mists. Phelps himself played the role of Bottom, and the enactment of Pyramus and Thisbe was done in greater detail than any other scene in this version. Though the primary aim of this emphasis was to evoke laughter, this production brought Bottom to limelight, opening up avenues to examine the character in greater detail, as may be seen in the productions that followed. If the 18th and 19th century performances of A Midsummer Night's Dream focused on scenery and spectacle, the 20th century productions of the play were largely shaped by the Freudian and later post colonial interpretations. While the Freudian approach has emphasized upon the unconscious and the aspects of sexuality, the post colonial representations have dealt with equations of power across race, gender, class, nationality, and ethnicity. Taken together with the changing moods of theatre and global shifts in comprehending Shakespeare, these productions tend to completely alter the paradigms of representation, putting forth a bricolage of varied perspectives. One such 20th century production of A Midsummer Night's Dream is that by Harley Granville Barker in 1914. This production used the complete Shakespearean text and employed modernist aesthetics in the form of color symbolism. Barker was influenced by contemporary theatrical theory and practice, as well as the new scholarship on the Elizabethan stage, and several contemporary reviews of Barker's production claimed it to be a post Impressionist attempt. According to Charles Barber, in Barker's hands, I quote, the set becomes an accessory to the verse, a means of amplifying its effect on the audience's imagination. Unquote. Barker makes use of color coded curtains to depict different locales, while the fairies are all clothed in gold to symbolize ethereality. His forest was designed to be a theatrical metaphor, and his fairies, they were walking embodiment of the complementary powers of love and imagination. However, Barker's most important contribution seems to be his portrayal of the mechanicals. He rescued them from 2 centuries of being interpreted as merely comic and humanized them as simple people anxious to perform their best. He also broke away with the tradition of using Mendelssohn's Wedding March and music that had been associated with the play since the first half of the 19th century. Instead, he employed English folk songs in this production. Another significant production of A Midsummer Night's Dream towards the late 20th century was that by Peter Brook in 1970. Stanley Wells notes that his production was influenced by Ian Cott's book called Shakespeare Our Contemporary, which appeared in English translation in 1964. Here, Koch's interpretation of the play was guided by the German Expressionist school of theatrical production, and he called it, I quote, the most erotic of Shakespeare's plays, unquote. For instance, regarding Bottom's transformation into an ass, Koch observed that, quote again, the ass does not symbolize stupidity. Since antiquity and up to the Renaissance, the ass was credited with the strongest sexual potency. Unquote. Brooks' production of the play used the complete, unadapted text of Shakespeare. His aim was to avoid all prettiness conventionally associated with the play. And to this end, he used full grown male performers for the fairies. A large empty white box faced the audience in the place of the stage, which could be interpreted as a blank canvas or a psychiatric institution. Against this background of white box minimalism, all actors except Hermia and Helena were dressed in vibrant single colored costumes. Further, breaking away from theatrical conventions, the actors were provided with trapeze bars and plates and performed circus like gestures to introduce the festive mood of comedy. In fact, Brooks' production has remained a significant one, which we turn back to all the time when we are thinking in terms of interpreting and staging A Midsummer Night's Dream. The 21st century only made the world more complex. The stage was by now a space for encapsulating the problematized ideas of identity, power, and hierarchy in a post colonial world order. With global boundaries opening up to an age of hybridity, cultural osmosis, and literary interface, the British Council commissioned Tim Supple to stage an Indo British co production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. While Brooks' productions had opened up several layered nuances of the play as a performative text waiting to be explored, Tim Supple's production in 2006, adhering to its own times, added a further dimension to the text by including a cast comprising actors entirely from India and Sri Lanka and using performative traditions from Bollywood to classical dance and folk theatre. The actors in this production, in this version of the play, spoke in six Indian vernacular languages besides English and employed techniques such as martial arts as well as traditional rope tricks. While Lysander spoke in Bengali, Oberon used the archaic Malayalam style, thereby imparting a dreamlike quality to the soundscape of the production situated in the multilingual context of India. The play concluded on a mystical note as the whole cast chanted and danced to the Sanskrit marriage hymns recited conventionally at Hindu weddings while holding flames in their hands. Now, this is exciting. This entire trajectory shows a complete transformation in the basic idea and the kind of interpretation the term dream offers itself to. So, in A Midsummer Night's Dream Revisited, that we had referred to at the beginning, Stanley Wells rightly observes that though the play is less than 2,200 lines long, I quote, in writing those lines, Shakespeare unconsciously created a generator for an astonishing quantity of human activity of many different kinds. Unquote. One is compelled to admit the truth of this statement as one glances across the multiple interpretations and readings that have inspired the staging of this play across all these centuries. This discussion has taken into consideration only a few such productions. The intercultural performances have been left largely untouched, and the film adaptations have been kept outside the ambit of this lecture. Yet, if one takes into consideration how the play that was called Insipid and Ridiculous by Pepys has continued to influence aesthetic imagination across cultures through all these years, one can perceive a magically transcendental quality in the title's use of the word dream. For indeed, it is only a dream that can manifest itself into the subconscious of readers across the centuries and still continue to acquire new forms in its actualization. It would be apt to conclude the discussion with Armando Menezes' comment on Shakespeare in his celebrated work called Airy Nothings. Menezes writes, and I quote, "All men find each his own image in him, his own individual experience, his own Shakespeare. The whole of Shakespeare is a mirror, even as nature is a mirror." Unquote. Thank you.